Elatorious, victorialus, Erastus, necessitas, Honorarius, despondeo, Spiritus Omdomio, Patriarcha Gladiator, Offictio Divinitas salutaris, Votivus libertas.
All right. Good evening. Let me know if you can hear me and how the sound is. How are we all tonight? Getting back on a regular schedule. It's been a week, hasn't it? It's been a difficult week again. Hetman can't join us tonight. He's got some family stuff. Unfortunately, a family member passed away. So you're just getting one guy talking history tonight, I'm afraid, but you'll have to make do. Suffer on. I shall try to make up for my lack of extra historian with my increased drinking this evening, because tonight we are covering Brianna Wu, NotSoErudite, and Whatifalthist. And I reviewed the NotSoErudite debate both by watching a couple people cover it themselves and watching it myself. And actually, I can only watched one of them. They were very bad, very, very bad. And you will suffer with me shortly. But it was bad. So grab a drink. I am having tonight a Southern Comfort Manhattan. 2 parts Southern Comfort, 1 part sweet vermouth, and maraschino cherry and a bit of cherry juice. It's a wonderful cocktail. Went out of style years ago. My grandfather actually liked it a lot. He used to have it every night at dinner. And he'd throw in however many cherries were in for grandchildren at the time. And so, after the cherry had suitably pickled in the cocktail, he would serve a cherry to each grandchild. And that started my family's lifelong drinking habit. So, actually, it worked out okay. None of my family is drunks. We all enjoy alcohol at family functions. That's about it. That is the cocktail this evening. The chaser is Brianna Wu. Brianna Wu, if you aren't aware, has been hurtling around Israel spreading blood libels against Palestinian children. And she has apparently left fairly shortly. Actually, I didn't even check the timestamp. There's a significant time difference here. What do we got? This was today, this morning, my time. So, yeah, okay. Brianna Wu is currently hurtling back to the United States, I suppose, if not arriving now, if she was stopping in Athens. Much to the chagrin of American leftists everywhere, who have been forced to deal with her for the past decade. Anyway, she's made a number of claims of her encounters with individuals in Israel and Palestine that were dubious. And she's decided to extend this to Greece, another ancient land utterly destroyed by Brianna Wu. Here's something deeply educational that happened to me as I was leaving Israel directionally. I'm checking in my luggage in Athens after leaving Tel Aviv. I get to the agent. He says hello, and I absentmindedly say shalom, like I've been saying for 3 weeks. He narrows his eyes at me, looking at me with something between disgust and suspicion. And I'm like, oh, this is why my American Jewish friends hide their Jewishness. Apparently, we have to let her come back in the U.S., yes. So, if you're not necessarily familiar with the history of the Jewish diasporas, a significant number of American Jews come from Imperial Russia at the close of the 19th century. They are, broadly speaking, Ashkenazi. They came from an area called the Pale, which constitutes Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Ukraine, Poland, and those areas, as they were once part of Imperial Russia. And like they were largely restricted to this area. And through a combination of like local pogroms and general attempts to drive them out and oppressive laws, a lot of Jewish individuals were charged kind of out of their traditional farming roles in Russia and into more rural roles. And this eventually led them to come to America. So, in large numbers, not everyone, but a significant number of American Jews, we have the second largest population of Jews in the world here, came during this period, immigrated then, and for very big reasons, principally because at this point, Zionism is kind of in its nascent form. And it's called the Pale Settlements. The Pale is me being a little bit incorrect. The Pale Settlement region, big space. Lucy would probably talk about it in some detail someday if she hasn't already. Lucy Haze, friend of the channel. They come to because Zionism is in a very nascent form here, and it's from many Jews, particularly as they're feeling increased pressure, as they're pushed out of jobs, and pushed out of the ability to take part in daily life. they decide they need to leave Russia. Not unsurprisingly. So they immigrate largely to the United States because somewhere else in Western Europe, you get a double whammy if you try to go to Western Europe as an Eastern European Jew. You're Eastern European, so there's already a suspicion there, and you're Jewish, um, so you have a double hit. The United States might be at times anti-Semitic, but nowhere near to the degree that Europe was at any point in its history. So it's a much better bet for you to move there, and there isn't really a coherent Zionist movement. There isn't really a coherent Zionist movement at this point. So there's nowhere else really to go. So like they bring a lot of their traditions over here, and principally if they largely today speak English anyway. Like I don't know that many uh, Jewish friends I have who use Yiddish for anything other than a good joke. Um, Mostly they speak to friends outside of the Jewish faith in English. Or if they're going to do anything traditional, they're going to speak Yiddish because Hebrew is a reconstituted language created largely as a result of Israeli nationalism. So American Jews don't run around saying shalom because they're hiding their Jewishness. They're not running around saying shalom because they don't typically do blessings on a regular daily basis as a form of hello. It's kind of that obnoxious, evangelical Christian, have a blessed day type thing. Not many people do that. And, and more to the point, like I have never met an American Jew who's not riotously happy to be Jewish and tell you about it. So, um, I don't know what the fuck she's on, but Brianna Wu is like a lot of non-Jewish Zionists. She's incredibly anti-Semitic. She engages with the the Jewish community in such a inauthentic way that it's really telling. Like, oh, this is why all my American Jewish friends hide their Jewishness. I'm going to go out on a limb and say Brianna Wu doesn't have any American Jewish friends. I think Brianna Wu has Twitter Jewish friends who she's never talked to in real life, and probably they aren't rich enough to hang out with her. Just saying. They probably don't have enough cars. If you want to hang out with Brianna Wu, you got to be Lauren Southern and start drowning migrants. So that, I think, is going to be our warm-up for the evening. Uh, Brianna Wu's coming back, and she's going to be insufferable. Well, based on my time in Israel, is going to be the new Gamergate for Brianna Wu. I swear to God, it's going to happen. Calling it right now. The next thing I want to cover tonight, we're going to get into NotSoErudite is a streamer on the internet. Recently, she also was apparently in Israel, but came back to do a set of debates on the Whatever podcast. Now, I'll be honest, I don't particularly like the Whatever podcast. Every time I see it, it's a pile of men over 30 who never grew up talking to a pile of young women in their 20s about their preferences concerning relationships, and somehow extrapolating the preferences of these women in their 20s onto the broader population of American women. And, I mean, sometimes when I see clips of the Whatever podcast, you see these women talking some obnoxious things. And that's fair in my mind, because guess what? When you're in your 20s, you have obnoxious views. It's natural. You're growing up, you're learning, you're coming to terms with your adulthood and your sexuality and all those things, and you're going to have silly things. The theme of this podcast generally bases itself around the same kind of idea as Ben Shapiro walking onto a college campus and speaking to a room full of undergrads to create clips that say, Ben Shapiro destroys college kid with facts and logic. Like, yes, I fully expect the man who graduated law school to be able to out rhetoric the 18-year-old college student. I don't like it. It's not good content ever, really. But Not So Erudite decided to launch into a pair of debates in which she defends feminism. And oh boy. So without further ado, let us begin.
California. I'm your host and moderator, Brian Atlas. A few quick announcements before the show begins. Whatever link is in the description. Follow and a Prime.
Oh, yeah, that reminds me. So I was speaking to someone today about workflow and doing content, and they turned me on to a new tool that I should try out. And it kind of got me thinking, I really need to start defraying some of the costs of this channel. So you will notice up at the top, there is a Stream Elements tipping link. If you like what we do and feel like supporting the show, please, by all means, go ahead and tip. Anything's appreciated. Only if you're able to, though. Additionally, in the description, you will see a link to our Patreon. That is another option if you wish to support the show. Either way is appreciated, and again, only if you're able to.
Sub if you have one. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our two debaters. I'm joined today by Jay Dyer. He's an author, comedian. He's the writer for the Sam Hyde Show and host of the Alex Jones Show TV. He has a bachelor's degree in philosophy. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And 2 years
Just making sure.
That's
and 2 year. Just making sure Google is correct on that. He's a political and social commentator. Also joining us today is Kyla, or as she goes online, NotSoErudite. She has an undergraduate in psychology and a graduate diploma in psychometrics. Excuse me. She's a content creator, streamer, and is.
Oh, I suppose everyone remembers that particular CV incident for her.
A political and social commentator. The topic of today's, excuse me. I'm still sick, guys. I'm getting over my illness, so my brain's operating at 10%. The topic of today's debate is feminism. You will each have a 5-minute opening statement, up to a 5-minute opening statement. The rest of the show is going to be open conversation with a few breaks for audience messages. At the end, you will each have up to a 5-minute closing statement. And Jay, we're going to have you give your opening statement first. Go ahead. Thank you for joining.
So before he gets into this, we're going to talk about his opening statement at some length because Erudite lets the pitch sail by here real quick.
Yes.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. Yeah, so I take the position that feminism is absolutely destructive to society. The only healthy society that we can have is a patriarchal society. If you look at the history of the world, history of civilizations, we notice that the natural formation, the natural structure that all societies, almost across the board, maybe a few tribal societies have had a matriarchy, but most societies fall into some form of natural hierarchy. Hierarchy is found in nature. We see it in the animal kingdom. We see it in the manimal kingdom.
Hierarchies are found in nature. We see it in the animal kingdom. I don't know exactly what he's talking about here. A food chain is not necessarily a hierarchy per se. It is a system of who is preying on what. And this isn't built by a natural ordering of who is strongest, best, or any kind of system of meritocracy, but it's based largely on what the animal in question that is predating on the animals can get. The idea that there's hierarchies in nature is kind of like a personification of ideas that simply don't exist. Like you're taking your understanding of your world and your individual perceptions and applying it to a lion, and a lion's going to be like, fuck you, I'm going to eat you anyway, jackass.
Kingdom that we inhabit, and when we look through history, we find certain civilizations have flourished, particularly with a worldview or a philosophy that gives it its social cohesion. The longest running civilization in history, the most successful, the most prosperous, was Byzantium. Byzantium was an Orthodox.
Okay, this is a weird claim to start off with. And like, again, Erudite lets this pitch sail by because it's a really easy way to start dismantling his worldview. Calling it Byzantium is something of a misnomer to begin with. Byzantium is the Eastern Roman Empire. It is the second half of the Roman Empire that outlives the Western half. Insofar as I would say it is a coherent civilization, this is a tricky thing because by and large, civilizations are not static. We kind of talk about them, especially in like high school type history classes, as a thing that is coherent across its existence. And this isn't really an accurate way to talk about civilizations. They are changing all the time. They warp and they change and they adapt, and new circumstances and new ideologies animate them. So you kind of get like, it's the ship of Theseus. If I pull out the planks of the ship of Theseus and replace them, is it still the ship? And yes and no. Again, it's a paradox. You kind of arrive at this thing. So, like, for instance, let's take the Eastern Roman Empire. At the close of the 13th century, it's conquered in it's sacked by the Fourth Crusade. They got lost on the way to the Holy Land and decided to sack Constantinople. Then, by and large, the Eastern Roman Empire somewhat falls apart and is reconstituted in a bunch of petty kingdoms as the Eastern Roman Empire. One day it's a coherent Roman thing. The next day it's a whole new thing with new rulers and new nobles and new people vying for power. It's calling itself the same thing, and they're reaching to the name as a form of legitimacy, but it's objectively not. There is, at least in part, a way that this changes. So to say that you have a coherent civilization all the way through the whole scope of the millennia that Rome exists is dubious at best.
Christian imperium dating back to the time of Constantine all the way up into the 1400s, when it
Constantine is not, no, it's shortly after the Tetrarchy, but it's not Constantine, really.
fell to Islam due to liberalization, due to forms of modernization, certain economic.
No, this is just wrong. It doesn't fall to Islam due to forms of modernization. The empire is largely weakened by military conflict, internal and external. The Seljuk Turks are one of many groups that repeatedly invade the empire, weakening it over time. The Christians invade the empire, utterly smashing Christendom in the east, by the way. And then finally the Ottomans come and put the whole damn thing out of its misery.
Economic open borders policy, shall we say. That
I guess it's an open borders policy insofar as the invading army decided to cross their borders. But no, that's not accurate at all.
led to the decline of Byzantium. So even in the most successful civilization in history, in Byzantium, we begin to notice that the liberalization of that society is what led to its decline and its eventual collapse, and even falling to Islam.
Well, no, and again, like, this is part of the problem, because like the Ottomans come and they conquer Constantinople and rename it to Istanbul, and now instead of being the Byzantine, it's the Holy Roman, or excuse me, it's the Ottoman Empire. But by and large, the administrative functions of the empire continue on as normal. Like if you're a Palestinian, for example, inside the bounds of the Ottoman Empire, that was just yesterday, the Byzantine Empire, or more properly Eastern Roman Empire, you don't notice anything. It's not like, oh, the stationery is changing. So like, this is like, again, like this, there can be very discrete changes in the political nature of a nation state over the course of its history, where you say, this is a new thing that we have to understand in new terms. But very rarely is that the case, particularly in the form of pre-modern empires, which are largely not centrally governed because they simply cannot be. There's no real system of communication that allows for direct control from the capital in these regions, so they're controlled by petty kings who swear fealty to a larger emperor and pay taxes. Like, so the overall change from day to day, like, wouldn't have been that noticeable. And I'd probably be remiss in mentioning that the Eastern Roman Empire spoke Greek as opposed to Latin, so that even departs from the Roman Empire generally. So this is like a very odd and historically deficient take. And you can see how this informs his worldview going forward in a very real way. And the sad fact is that Kyla is totally inequipped to deal with this or to approach this topic at all.
If we fast forward to modernity, if we look at women's rights or the idea of the first wave of feminism, feminism finds its origins in French revolutionary philosophy, which led to the first wave, I should say. French revolutionary philosophy with Mary Wollstonecraft and others posited the idea of absolute equality
Mary Wollstonecraft, well known for partaking in the French Revolution.
in society based around the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, all of which were revolutionary at the time and sought to overthrow not just the church and not just the state or the monarchy or a patriarchal society, but all society, all areas of life had to be revolutionized. Since that time, we've had second wave feminism, we've had third wave feminism. Third wave feminism, interestingly, which not many people know, was actually funded by very wealthy, powerful oligarchical elites. In fact, in the Rockefellers' authorized biography, there's an entire chapter on Abby Rockefeller's funding of third wave feminism and Cell 16, which was the most radical form of this. This is really what prepared the way for the absolute insane degeneracy that we see in today's society. Western civilization, in other words,
I guess we just missed the Jews here by a fraction of a hair.
could not have gotten to the point that we're at had we not had first, second, and third wave feminism preparing the way for the absolute and total revolution against all natural order, all biological order, and the notion of patriarchy itself. In fact, many of the
So what is the biological order? And let's assume that you are in this room with Mr. Dyer here and you get into a wrestling match and beat him. Are you biologically better than him? Would he accept that position? I don't think he would. But it seems to me that his argument is because I can overpower you biologically, this is how things should be. And again, this is a somewhat deficient view of history, because if he looks back to the Roman Empire, which he just decided to reference, he would find a very different view of how women function in society than they do under the modern form. The problem you find with these traditional guys like Dyer or someone like Counterpoints is they have this view of tradition that dates back to 100 years at best, which is a flimsy ass tradition when you get down to it.
The famous feminists over the last several decades have openly said that in order to destroy Western civilization, they would have to destroy the masculine archetype, the patriarch. That is, God.
Which feminist said this, please?
God the Father had to be destroyed to make way for the rise of the goddess, etc. All the various things that we see attending to or accompanying the revolution that is feminism. If you look on my wall on X right now, you'll notice at the very top is an interview that the famous director Aaron Russo did with a friend of mine, Alex Jones. And in that interview, they discuss Aaron Russo's interview with Nick Rockefeller. And Nick Rockefeller
My dude, I wouldn't name drop Alex Jones in any other environment but a right-wing one.
said that the greatest tool to revolutionize and control society was feminism. Modern feminism changed the landscape of getting women out of the house, into the workforce, quote, so that they could be taxed and that there would be less children, less families. So we have from one of the key elites from the Rockefeller family admitting that the purpose of this was to change society, reduce population, tie it into neoliberal economics, taxation on a mass scale for the population, and thus it has been an absolute disaster, and it has nothing to do with equality, it has to do with...
So all of those things you just named were being done by society well before feminism was a gleam in anyone's eye. One of the principal things that affected the French Revolution that you were talking about just a few seconds ago was taxation on a mass scale. Will I also be reacting with the debate with Jim Bob? No, there's only so much I can take. And we're doing Whatifalthist as well tonight.
With control, it has to do with social control. It's dystopian, it has to do with social dystopian control, putting us into a utilitarian technocratic society. And I would say that this is all an attempt, admittedly, if you go back to people like early feminists like Wollstonecraft or others throughout history, Alexander Kollontai of the Bolshevik Revolution, they all speak about this as intimately tied into not just sexual revolution, but the overthrow of masculinity, ultimately the overthrow of the idea of God the Father, the ultimate patriarch. And that's where we are today, is in a society that has adopted revolutionary philosophy that is ultimately anti-male, anti-biology, anti-reality, because they all go together. In other words, feminism cannot be divorced from the revolution against biology, the revolution against masculinity, the revolution against every area of life that is healthy, wholesome, and based around patriarchy.
Well, that was certainly words. It would be a wonderful thing if we could talk about that during the course of this debate, but we shall see what happens next.
All right, thank you for that, Jay. Kyla, would you like to give your opening statement now?
Sure. Mine isn't going to be nearly as long, but I was really interesting, and I basically would grant you lots of that stuff. I would essentially argue that feminism is not only a necessity, it's unavoidable. I think that's where society tends to go. I think women joining the workforce, while there's lots of cons with it, one of the biggest pros is the massive boost to GDP and just the competitiveness of.
This is weird. Okay. GDP is a measurement of gross domestic product, total economic output of a country. The problem with, hey, Fairy Queen, the problem with GDP as a measurement of this, and particularly in the case of women, is that women doing traditional household roles contribute an awful lot of economic activity that is essentially unpaid. So you have people doing homemaking, laundry, taking care of kids, cooking, cleaning, all these things, which you can put a price tag on for the most part, not being accounted for in the GDP. Like, there is a massive amount of untalked about productive work that homemakers do that do not in any way get counted in our economic forecasting and our economic reports. Like, I think, like, it's a couple $100 million worth of work being done by women a year that's essentially unpaid broadly in the role as homemakers. And to be fair, some men as well. And this is all not captured in what we traditionally view as our economic indicators. So this is a weird place to pin your argument to begin with.
Every nation that includes women. And overall, I think feminism is broadly good for society, but I am sure that I would be happy to talk with you about a number of areas that I think have been harmful for society. I think feminism has been co-opted and often twisted. I think particularly in the third wave, we saw this by what I would call gender opportunists. And so when I think about feminism, I'm more interested in a feminism that is centralized around empowering women and promoting femininity. I think when you talk about egalitarianism, I think it's a really interesting concept, but I think we need to be precise in what we talk about. So I guess to open, I'd maybe start with a question. With your philosophy background, I'm sure you're familiar with Heidegger's concept of chatter.
No.
Okay, so Heidegger is an interesting philosopher from the 40s, but he has this idea of chatter that I think is really interesting for discussion, which is essentially how a lot of times when people have like philosophical and idea wrestling conversations, they use the same word, but they have different meanings. Make sure that we agree on what we mean by certain words so that we can actually talk about the ideas underneath them and hopefully come to a better understanding of everything.
What are the words?
It's approximately at this point where the entire debate runs off the rails, because now we spend the rest of the debate talking about definitions instead of the ideas underneath the definitions. So this is Kyla's first major tactical error here.
Words you would like specified or
probably for
clarified on?
this conversation, we should talk about patriarchy and feminism. Those seem like the most obvious things to define. And then after that, just if we come to a word that we keep both using, it would probably just be useful to define it and make sure that we agree to what we're talking about, if that works.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you like to start with your definitions and then Jay can give his?
Sure.
Or
So,
see where you guys agree.
yeah, I'm curious. So patriarchy, I would define it as a hierarchical structure where men monopolize soft and hard power.
No, not even remotely. Soft and hard power is a set of terms that has absolutely no concept outside of international relations. Soft and hard power refers to the distinction between how a nation executes and uses its own power abroad. Hard power typically refers to military power, and soft power refers to influence campaigns. So soft power can be something like we've seen influence campaigns on social media to try to influence a conversation, or it can be paying money to build a school, for example, so that kids have a place to go. hard power is turning around and invading your country. This is not a concept that exists in everyday life. Men are not going, well, my wife was being kind of a bitch, so I built that bitch a she shed in the backyard. Soft power, dude. Fist bump. No, not a thing. Uh, by the same token, I wouldn't necessarily like ascribe any sense of hard power to what happens in normal everyday life. This is not like a coherent definition of patriarchy at all. Instead, what you need to say is patriarchy is a system where privilege and is typically monopolized by men. Simple. Keep it easy. Go.
I think that they have authority. I wouldn't say it's a monopoly on power, because women can have a degree of influence and power in society, but it's under the headship of a man. So, for example, a job, right? As an example, Proverbs 31 talks about women being able to work, but it's sort of under the purview of the husband. So it's not independence, it's not doing their own thing, it's a family unit working together, so there's roles.
Sure. So when we're thinking about like a job, so when I think about a monopoly of hard and soft power, in my mind, I'm thinking law, like kind of like men are mostly monopolizing positions in law, but also soft power, like media, and kind of able to kind of set the tone culturally as well. So they kind of have these areas of power mostly fully occupied by men, particularly systems where men force it to be the case that it's only men in those positions.
Yeah,
Do you
it's
feel
just
like that's
monopoly is a difficult term because it suggests totality, and again, there can be a shared situation here that's not a total monopoly. But
okay.
Fine, I'll go with it. It's fine.
Sure. We can say
And this is, she thought this was good. She thought, okay, I'm going to agree. He's going to agree to my definition. He's like, if she's going to sit on this definition, then I can just hammer her with it later. This was a bad move. Great face, by the way. Yeah, no, it's not a monopoly in any shape or form. The fact of the matter is that, like, they typically maintain those positions. One of the things that you will note, particularly if you talk with people, is like people will try to, and I saw a couple, Beckett did this once. He tried to argue that the exercise of power under the auspices of a system, such as nobility, a woman, an aristocratic woman exercising power, is an argument against feminism. And the reality is that in that case, that power still stems from the authority granted by the landed titled man. She's simply married to him. So that's not really the case. Like, it's a really weird distinction. Hi, Maya. Hi, June. Monopoly is a fun board game. No, Monopoly is not a fun board game. It's designed to make you hate your siblings. It works very well at that process, too.
say like a soft monopoly or something like that.
Okay.
But essentially a hierarchical structure where
That's
men tend to mostly occupy positions
That's
of power.
fine.
Okay.
Sure.
Feminism, I define it as the empowerment of women and promotion of femininity. Do you agree with that, or do you have a very different definition?
Why femininity? Why is a woman required to... Okay, this is where Judith Butler starts crying. Like, why does it have to be a femininity that is promotion? Why can't it simply be the empowerment of women to do whatever the fuck they want?
I think of it as something necessarily tied to revolution, and I think when you say the word empowerment, it's also ambiguous because that could be a lot of things in different contexts. So I don't know what you think empowerment is.
Okay, so by empowerment, what I mean is typically going to be, I'm a very big freedom of opportunity person, liberal, guilty as charged. So empowerment would be eroding any obstacles to disadvantages or inabilities to take opportunities that other people would have. That would be one way of empowering someone.
So, for example, there was a TED Talk about 10 years ago, and one of the ladies who was a diehard sort of CEO out of the academic world, she went into academia and then became a CEO. She was bragging that most CEOs now, this was again about 10 years ago, are now women. That we're reaching some tipping point, that there's a large majority of women that are now CEOs. Do you think that's good? Is that fair? Because I would see that as a revolution again.
I want to check this. Let's see. That's in 2021, 52 women in Fortune 500 companies are CEOs. Then the Russell 3000, 9% of CEOs are women. A 118% increase in women CEOs. That doesn't really say much if there's like 52. Obviously, it's really hard to get a full accounting of how many CEOs are women because there are plenty of people who are listed their job title as CEO, and it's 5 guys in the back of a pickup truck. So, like, tricky, but like for large scale companies, it's certainly not anywhere near a majority.
It's male authority.
I see it. I am very dubious of her claim. B, I see it as like neutral. I don't really care who trickles up to the top, so long as the people who trickle to the top did so because there was free opportunity to do so, right? So like in our society, I'm sure here's something we probably agree on. Most of the positions of power in our society are occupied men because men tend to be more extreme, like they're just more extreme in bell curve, like genetically. And
What the fuck does that even mean? They're more extreme in bell curve. By definition, a bell curve is not going to contain that many extremes. It's going to be regularly distributed. So most people are going to occur in the middle, and you will get increasingly few as you go out. So what does it mean to be more extreme bell curvedly?
they don't often take time away from work with kids, so they have a little bit more time to dedicate. So we see at the highest levels of trickling to the top, men typically occupy those roles. I'm sure you and I would agree.
Yeah, but when you say...
So here's the thing about that, though. Men don't have really the opportunity to do so. Like, I imagine if you put a new father and asked them, do you want to spend more time with your newborn baby, or would you want to go back to work? They'd pick spending more time with their newborn baby. By and large, the opportunity doesn't exist. So the idea that this is a useful skill to have is entirely socially mediated, not necessarily a genetic thing. What the fuck is she on about?
Extreme, again, this is a very ambiguous term. Extreme in their views, extreme on the bell curve.
Sorry,
Those
I
are
meant
two different
genetically.
things.
Like, so because of the Y axis specifically, so I don't know if you know anything about IQ research, for
I
example.
know some about that. Yeah.
So men, while like obviously the average IQ for men and women is 100 because it's normalized, men tend to occupy a bit more of those extreme spaces. They're both the lowest and the highest IQ. And we see men doing that all the time. They tend to just have more extreme genetic traits, both for
That comment is why I don't like watching this show.
success and for struggling, right? That's why we tend to see men overrepresented on both sides of most things. So that's why men often will trickle to the top of most workspaces, for example.
And you think that's because of extremes of IQ?
Well, not just IQ. That would be extremes of multiple things. And also, I think I
You
said...
said IQ a minute ago.
Yeah, IQ would be one thing. I just don't think IQ is the only thing that would predict you trickling to the top.
What are
IQ is not really a good predictor of what you're going to do in life. It's a better predictor of what you're not going to do. I am dubious of anyone who spends way too much time talking about bell curves to begin with. They generally tend to have an essentialized view of intelligence that just doesn't work. And intelligence manifests in very different ways in very different situations. And the other half of how intelligence manifests is largely dependent upon what we set up to value in intelligence in the first place. So certain tasks you might be good at that are rote or mechanical aren't necessarily going to be task tested by IQ, but they're still valuable because someone is willing to pay you to do them. This is a tricky place to get into generally, just because it is so fraught to begin with. It's not a place to rest your argument either, because IQ tests are incredibly dependent on circumstance. Like, if your stomach rumbles the wrong way while you're taking a standardized test, you can score radically different than you might otherwise have done if you weren't hungry that day. If you don't get enough sleep, like, all of these things can mess with your IQ in very significant ways and make it a difficult measure. And more to the point, if there is a correlation in IQ, it typically is because the people who made IQ tests were already testing for the things they wanted.
The things that led men to be in those positions other than IQ.
Probably just the ability to work. Like, they don't take time away from work for children. Their wife typically does
Could
that.
there be anything biological?
Well, IQ
Would that be biological?
IQ would be something biological,
It's
right?
partly
No, it's not even remotely. No, you want to know what the biggest thing that's going to affect your success at a job? Networking, who you know matters immensely more than what you know. Networking. So social networks are what's going to affect who gets into a position. And in turn, if there is a characteristic to ascribe to who succeeds in business, it's charisma. If you want to break into the management of a company and you are not networked with that company to begin with, you need to be charismatic. You need to be able to get people to like you. Networking matters. Who you know matters. This is significant. This is how systems of patriarchy replicate, because people choose what they want and what they know. That's how they choose to surround themselves with. The ability to truly, I mean, place yourself in a situation where you have a diverse set of people around you, giving you diverse ideas and inputs, is very rare. This is what really affects how positions of power are filled. It's who you know. Then you will see this very much if you are a woman in one of those positions, because you have kowtowed to the men who could give it to you. This is completely divorced of any kind of real understanding of the workplace environments, because Kyla hasn't worked really, and this guy probably doesn't seem like he's done much actual work outside of working for Alex Jones.
biological, but I'm saying, like, in terms of what a man is biologically, is that anything to do with what might be roles in society, hierarchy?
I don't think there's super good evidence that like testosterone predicts like anything other than like aggression towards those like equal or lower, and like muscle distribution. I think it's a lot more going to be
muscle distribution is part of biology, right?
Sure. I just don't think like muscles get you to the top.
Yes, it was the giant muscles of Dave that managed to propel him to the top of the company as the vice president of sales. It was Dave's muscles, totally just his muscles.
Top of a Fortune 500
What about
company.
like being a soldier? Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why men are significantly better soldiers than women.
But what about that high IQ?
Are they? Are they? Not particularly. They're significantly more commonly soldiers. The ability to be a good soldier is not also entirely dependent on physical attributes. You will find very rapidly that if you enter the United States military, they will give you a tripod of education, physicality, and general soldiering skills, many of which are correlated with your ability to do educational tasks. Combat is a very tricky thing to like ascribe that to. Endurance is also not necessarily a case of long-term muscles. This is an important point too, if we're talking about this, because it's coming up a lot in the mil Twitter community about the realigning of the PT test towards a more unified standard. The standard exists not to point out individual excellence. It rewards individual excellence, but it's not to promote it. It's to promote unity across the group and to bring people together. And to get everyone working on the same page and have the same capabilities. So like this concept that it makes you somehow better is strange. And like to point this out, a traditional portion of any military PT test in the past 20 years has been a 2 to 3 mile run, depending on she's not a feminist, Maya, not in any real sense. No, a 2 to 3 mile run, depending on the service branch in question. And so obviously some people run faster than others. So if you're one of those people who finishes the course first, traditionally what you do on a test is you don't stop. You go back after your time is recorded, and you cheer on the people who are still running to get them through the finish line. It's a show of camaraderie and togetherness, and it says we're in this together despite the fact that we just ran an individual race. That's part of what makes like the military attractive to a lot of people. Not everything, but that sense and that tradition, like it's not like something you do and codified in rules and regulations, but it is a thing that's done, and it's a thing you find in healthy units with high morale. Like the standard doesn't exist for this, and like again, this is not something that either of these people would be familiar with, because they haven't done anything in their lives other than sit around and pontificate.
That group of high IQ, does that help get them to the top of the CEO ladder?
That would definitely help. I think it's like a 45% to 60%
And you admit
predictor.
that that's partly genetic?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So it seems like, naturally speaking, when I appealed in my opening statement to what's natural and biological, men are just sort of fitted to those things. Their very constitution
Yeah, they have to.
Nothing in this conversation has been natural or biological.
is for those things.
Yeah, it's just with in 2025 with women having birth control and tampons, there's less obstacles to that, so they might trickle to the top too. And I just want a society that would allow them to do so.
Birth control and tampons are what let women trickle to the top. Apparently, birth control and tampons can even out the glass ceiling. You can just carve your way through the glass ceiling with a tampon. I did not know that. It is a truly new and exciting field we're in.
But why? That's what I'm getting at is, if this is biological and thus, quote, natural to a degree, according to what you're arguing, what's the need for women to do?
Well, not even that, Maya. Like, sometimes soldiers do engage in hand-to-hand combat, but hand-to-hand combat is not entirely a issue of strength. Most throws that you can perform in any kind of combat, jiu-jitsu in particular, is done by leverage and not by strength. You don't use strength to engage in a lot of that activity. If the saying goes, if you can fuck or play baseball, you can fight, and women can do softball. So here we go.
What is then perhaps not natural for them to do in society?
Fighting, it's all in the hips.
Because there are lots of women that are still in the high IQ realm that are very capable, that make excellent bosses.
So exceptions make
Could we get one for this conversation, please?
the rule?
No, more like freedom of our opportunity, right? That's my premise. Is I
So the
want
okay.
It's like the innovator scale, right? I don't want to arbitrarily just say 50% of our society.
Let's move
so
on.
the net good for society is just what? More fiat money? Like what determines that?
Yep, GDP is a good thing.
Okay, fiat money is not necessarily tied to GDP. You can have a GDP and have a gold standard, although you won't have a good GDP if you have a gold standard.
Disagree?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be honest. When I did combatives, it was an optional thing in college. It was not required. It was just something I did extra. Not considered an essential skill, and mostly it's not done outside of extra training.
I do.
You don't think
first of
GDP is
all,
good?
like, what if the money is a scam?
That doesn't have anything to do with GDP. Why would not having more GDP for a country not be good?
What do you mean? What if the money is a scam?
The nature of the money itself, if the money system is a debt-based scam, doesn't have anything to do with GDP?
Not.
What do you mean a debt-based scam? Like, this is your weird Alex Jonesisms coming out. No, fiat money is not a debt-based scam. Fiat money stabilizes your money supply, lowers inflation, and fundamentally makes it possible to have a money supply that adapts to a growing population. Fiat money is good. Anyone who says otherwise is free to hit that donation link up top that's pinned there and give me their dirty, dirty fiat money.
Really, because GDP is about like the income of a country, right? So like debt is part of how you
No, it's the total product of a country.
navigate income of a country.
Right. But our country's income is presently based on pure debt, right? Is that a...
No, it's not. Government debt is not the same thing as personal debt. It is much different. You aren't able to print money. You cannot guarantee your own debts without, providing collateral. The stability of a government is what guarantees its debt. It makes it fundamentally different. Like what, dude? No.
Bad thing?
Our GDP is not based on debt. No.
It is. Well, the whole system is based on debt.
No, it's not.
Gross domestic product is not itself debt. I'm saying the economic system itself is based on debt.
Yeah, like
Because
like
it's a
MTN.
debt-based system.
Yeah, like modern theory of like money is very debt organized. It's just like debt is not this like boogaloo scary thing in and of itself.
No. I'm talking about our system is fiat. It's not attached to anything hard. There's no hard currency that our
Yes, it is attached to something hard. It's attached to the good faith and credit of the nation that issued the currency. Your money is going to buy you a soda on the way home, sir. It's not. Your money hasn't been tied to gold in any real sense in decades. Bretton Woods was not a system for everyday people. It was a system for countries, foreign countries, to be able to back their own currencies in unstable times. The United States stability is what gives that our buying power and the power of the dollar. Fiat money is good. And again, if you don't like your fiat money, there's a donation link pinned to the top of chat.
money is attached to since the shock doctrine of Nixon, right? So
Yeah, of
Nixon
course.
goes off the gold standard, so we're now a debt-based system. So I'm just saying
Again, that was not a gold standard that you as a person were involved in. That was a gold standard that countries were involved in, dude. Come on, little basic history.
highest quality was the best GDP in society. So your organizing principle is a neoliberal economic theory. So what I want to know is, even if that's itself based on debt, then what's the source of the good here?
So in this
Why? Okay, even if we accept your weird little fantasy that debt is the underlier of the economy, why is that preclude the ability of her argument to be good? Her argument's bad for other reasons, but why does that preclude a good coming from the gross domestic product of a country? By the way, the gross domestic product of a country is utterly amoral and has no good or bad connotations. It simply is a measurement. You don't say, oh, my ruler is just a net good for society. Like what is that? That's weird to begin with.
case, what is good for society is having a competitive GDP so that your enemies can't stomp
That's
you.
the highest good?
That's not the highest good. That's the good of what I'm talking about in the case of women entering in.
What is
in
the
big
highest
scale.
good that determines that
And so GDP is not directly correlated to your ability to endure a hostile power at all. Like it can be, but like if my entire economy is tuned towards building widgets, I'm not going to have a lot of guns.
that's good?
Are you talking about morality?
Just at all in your system. You tell me what your system's standard of good is.
So I'm not really sure why we're having the epistemic conversation. I
Why
guess
not?
Because you invited the epistemic conversation when you decided to make this conversation about definitions, Kyla.
Because it feels like we're losing the plot of the conversation.
No, I want to know what your standard of the
No, it's not losing the plot. The plot is gone.
good is.
Again, what do you mean by good?
You said that the GDP is necessarily attached to the highest good.
I didn't say highest good. I said it's a good thing.
Okay, then I'm asking you what the highest good is that determines that the GDP is better than not caring about GDP.
So you're asking for my moral foundation theory?
Sure.
I'm a divine
You tell
command
me.
theorist.
What?
From what divine command?
What? Exogesis rides again.
The Christian God.
And he says GDP is good?
No.
Did Moses come down and talk
I don't
about
think GDP is moral.
You just said it was the highest good
I
for
didn't say it was
this
the highest good.
This debate.
No, I said it's good for society.
Then it's moral if it's good.
I don't think it's moral in this case.
If it's good, it's moral.
Well, you can have good
The
as in
good is a
functional.
moral claim.
Well, of course, you can have functional claims, right?
So if it's only functional or if it's only pragmatic, then it's not ultimately a good. It's just subjective.
So at a functional level, it is, I guess, do you disagree with this idea that it's good for a state to have competitive high GDP?
It could be, but I don't think it's the highest good, and I have a standard of good. So I'm trying to figure out what yours is.
Well, what's more important for a nation state than GDP?
The health
Human rights.
of the society.
Sure, but if the health of society is really high,
I mean, could you have? Let me give an example.
The United States has the highest GDP presently, I do believe, of any nation in the world, and our society is healthy. fucking sucks. Our healthcare system sucks. We pay a huge amount of money into our healthcare system, which impacts our GDP quite significantly, actually. And we get outcomes that are not great. Like, what?
Could you have a society that's a mass addicted to drugs but has a good number, a nice income?
Probably not.
No, you can have societies that are
It's here. It's this society. Hi, nice to meet you.
full of detriment, like full of ghettos, and they're ruled over by organized crime that make a lot of money.
Typically those countries, like if you're thinking about like the Congo or like areas that have like high levels of corruption, their GDP is horrible because typically crime is not.
I guess the Congo is certainly a choice, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I think he was probably thinking of Brazil, and neither of those answers is accurate. Much radically different concepts going on here. I say.
Good for GDP.
But I'm saying you could conceivably have that. It doesn't matter whether there's some exception to that rule somewhere.
It's
in
not
the
exception. I would say
Congo.
the rule is, in general, when you have lots of corruption and drug addiction, it's not good for GDP.
But I'm saying conceivably you could have a ruling elite that makes a lot of money from drugs, and the society itself is living in shantytown, right?
I
They're
don't
living on
think that
Skid
that
Row.
nation state would have high GDP. I don't think there's any evidence
It
that that
doesn't
nation
matter
state.
if you think that, because it's conceivable that you could have that, right? You could have a successful oligarchy that makes a lot of money, and the people themselves don't do very well.
Are you talking about like Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, sure.
Sure, but Saudi Arabia, again, is not nearly as competitive as somewhere like America or any
Well,
NATO
again,
country.
how do we know that competitiveness for women is a good? You've just said that that's the case because it increases GDP.
So I'll just
So
break
it's
it
a
down.
circle.
It's okay. If we're going to do
What?
we can do Agrippa's trilemma. It's just useless. I can use it at you too, right?
Well, but if I'm arguing for a moral ought on the basis of
This is not a moral ought.
It is. You
This
said
is
it's
not.
a good. If you said something is the
I
good.
said it's functional.
Yeah,
what
but-
word? Okay, we're doing chatter.
So
what
now
word
you're
do you want
deba-
me to
in a
use when I say
debate-
functional?
No, in a debate, if you're arguing for your position, then you're necessarily arguing that we ought to follow your position.
Yeah, I think I said
so
it's
it
a
is an ought.
necessity and an unavoidable. That doesn't
So
mean
it
it's
is an ought.
It doesn't mean it's a moral claim. It would be like real politics.
Here we go. Let's do this. Hang on, I'm working on the Stream Elements link.
Well, then it's an ought, because do you think we ought to follow your
Not all
arguments?
oughts are moral.
Ought we follow your arguments?
As in, like, should you do what I prescribe for society?
Ought we follow the true arguments versus the false arguments?
Sure.
Okay. Then you're using an ought right now to argue for your position.
Sure, but this isn't a moral claim.
You just argue that we ought to follow your position. That's
It's still not a moral claim.
It is.
It's not.
Oughts are morals if you're extending them to everybody in the theoretical realm.
All right, I have just re-upped the Stream Elements link. I'm putting a new one here and pinning this one instead.
Of listening to the debate.
Do you think that it's
So we ought
moral or
not?
not moral to have GDP? Do you think GDP is moral?
I'm pointing out that your
Could you
position.
answer my question this
I have a
time?
different system than you, so
Do
it's
you
not going to
think-
apply to my system.
Do you think that GDP is moral?
Everything in life is conceivably or potentially moral,
How is GDP moral?
because you extended it to, in this argument, the highest good.
I did not.
You
put-
did
I
walk
did
it
not-
back.
All
after
right,
I
we're
asked for
not
the
doing
highest
this
good.
part
No.
anymore.
Yes, you did.
Conversation now?
Oh God, we're still in
You
GDP.
saying that doesn't avoid there.
Well, we can, but you're not even like, we're doing
Because-
chatter. We're literally,
No,
we're doing the
we're
thing I
at
asked
the
not
point
to do.
where you don't understand the issue. That's the
That's
point.
not true. All you've done at this point is just like, you're just weaponizing
No, you
Yes.
admitted that the debate is about whether feminism is good
Thank you, June, for the $10 tip. Have some dirty Antipodian money, Monopoly money. Thank you. I appreciate Monopoly money. It will help me buy Boardwalk.
for society. That's a moral, ethical domain right there.
Sure, there are some moral elements.
So when you make
and
arguments
some
about
functional
GDP,
arguments.
if it's not moral, then it's not relevant to the debate.
It's absolutely moral. What language would
It's
you like
moral?
to use? I said it's not. There is moral elements and there are some non-moral elements. GDP
Is the debate today about something moral?
I don't know if I agreed to saying we're only going to talk about epistemics and morality. Good
You started an epistemic discussion.
is, again, this word that we're basically doing chatter around, where you're assigning a label to it, and I haven't agreed to it.
What does
trying to figure
God
out
lay
your
out in the
position.
Bible?
Say about how God organized that society.
He gave them prescriptions about how to run their life from Moses.
How was that society organized?
It was organized, I believe, in a patriarchal society
Yes,
with matrilineal
correct.
heritage.
And it was a monarchy,
Yes.
a male monarchy.
Yep.
Okay. So
We're talking about the Israelites here. Yeah. When we're talking about the Bible, in particular, the Bible kind of postulates in terms of the Israelites, they postulate a unified monarchy between the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, which are very real kingdoms, just not necessarily easy to figure out if that period they're talking about exists. So this is somewhat hypothetical to begin with.
in that regard, God was not feminist, right?
I've never said that God was feminist.
Well, I'm asking if there's a history example of where God organized a feminist society.
I mean, it's interesting because when you look at like ancient Judeo history, if you're not being presentist, it was like insanely progressive compared to like the pagans around them, like the Assyrians and Babylonians.
What? Progressive in what way? And when are we talking? Because the Assyrians are not. Neo-Assyrians are, for example, responsible in the 6th century BCE for the conquering of the kingdom of Israel and the spreading of the first diaspora at that time. And the Neo-Babylonians are afterwards. Like, they explicitly conquered the Jews and sent them elsewhere. And that's, like, kind of the first real interaction I can think of off the top of my head. The Assyrian Empire, at its height, is positively ancient compared to Israel. The Israelite kingdoms. They're what?
That's not what I'm asking.
Well, it is what you're asking.
You're calling
right?
it progressive, and I would just say it's healthy. So the fact that they
Sure,
had,
yeah,
the,
like
ten,
God,
they had the Ten
God
Commandments.
seemed to advocate to some degree for a better treatment of women than any other society
I
around
agree,
them.
but that's not feminism.
To some degree, you could argue that it is if you
No,
agree
it's
with
not.
my definition, which is like the empowerment.
Well, but your definition is
No, it's not. Like even if we take a biblical sense, the women in the Bible are treated terribly. Are they empowered in a way? No, they're functionally property. At all points in the Bible, women are treated as property of their husbands or property of their fathers, and then they become property of their husbands in marriage. In what way is that feminine? Like, we have standards of treatment, sure, but I can't beat my wife regularly. It is not feminism.
so
Motion of
elastic
femininity.
and broad that it could be anything
But you agreed
except
to
for
it.
what my position is. No, I don't, because I'm not agreeing that Old Testament patriarchal society is feminist. You just admitted it's not.
If you're not agreeing, why did we even define the words at the beginning?
Can
if
you
now you're
name a
just rejecting
feminist
them?
society
I'm not
that
interested
God
to.
advocated?
I'm not interested to.
You appealed to God.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to treat women well.
Did God ever? That's not feminism. Now you're equivocating.
I'm not equivocating.
Yes, you are.
How am I equivocating?
You're changing, moving the goalposts as to what feminism is.
That's a completely different
so
fallacy.
If God
Am I
has,
equivocating
so
or am I
if
moving?
in
Hold
the
on,
law,
am I equivocating or
if-
am I moving the goalpost now?
It's both.
It's
You're
both.
equivocating on the word and moving the goalpost to make your position work. So if there's no feminist,
not what
if there's no
equivocating means.
feminist,
Yes, Lot handed over his daughters to the mob. Feminism, peak feminist energy right there.
Equivocating on the word.
That's not what equivocating
I know
means.
what equivocation means. Yes, it does. It means that two different understandings of a word. You're equivocating on the word.
Okay.
Feminism. And you're defining to say that if God...
The fact that the moderator didn't throw a dictionary at both of them is a true act of self-restraint.
in the Old Testament gives women rights, that's feminism. That's not what feminism is. Feminism is a modern movement, post-revolutionary
Then why
philosophy.
did you agree to my definition of feminism?
This is really interesting because he talks about the liberalization of the Byzantine Empire in his opening statement. And liberalism is a modern movement based off of modern philosophy. And he's saying that feminism must necessarily be a modern movement based off of modern philosophy. Oh, it is such a lack of self-awareness. Such a lack of self-awareness that you almost feel sorry for everyone involved, except they agreed to this.
Because it's so broad that that's fine if you want to defend that against patriarchy, but I'm arguing patriarchy against feminism.
So
and
all
what
you're
you
doing
appeal
now
to
is moving the goalposts by the originally agreeing to a definition of feminism, and now you're saying that can't work anymore because it's defeating my argument?
The Old Testament God and the New Testament God are the same God, and they never institute a feminist society. And women's rights are being made in the image of God, that women are protected now in that status.
What do you mean by
is
a
not
feminist
feminism.
society? What do you mean by a feminist society?
A matriarchal society
I'm
or,
not advocating
or a
for that.
non-patriarchal society.
I've never advocated for either of these things.
Okay, but feminism has never...
Why are you in this discussion if you are not advocating for feminism? You should have subtagged in Fairy Queen, Christ.
been a societal goal in the Old Testament or the New Testament or the history of any Christian society.
Again,
so you have no
I haven't
examples of
advocated.
this.
I haven't advocated for any of these things. I don't need
You
to.
appealed to God as your standard of the ought and
I
the
said
right, the moral right.
Yeah, it's a
right?
moral thing to treat
Correct.
women well.
And then I said, give me the examples of
Beelzebub told me to tell you you're all wrong.
where that God ever instituted anything like what you're talking about in terms of feminism, and there's not. There's not.
There is, according to the definition you agreed to.
No,
on
there's
feminism.
not.
Feminism is a shifting target.
Yeah, the empowerment and promotion of femininity. Judaism.
That is not what is happening in the Old Testament.
Judaism is the most progressive approach to femininity of all of the
Modern
ancient
rabbinic
religions.
The Persians would disagree.
Judaism is not the same thing as what's in the Mosaic Law.
You asked for Old Testament examples, which I just gave you one.
That's not rabbinic Judaism. You admitted that it's a patriarchal society that's a
What do
monarchy.
you mean it's not rabbinic? You don't think Old Testament Judeo like?
No, it's not.
It's not even remotely.
It's not
different.
rabbinic. What are you talking about?
It's not the same thing as
You
rabbinic
don't think
Judaism.
that the 1200 BC society that was erected by King David wasn't a rabbinic?
It's not 1200 BCE. It's like 800 BCE at best. The Israelites did not form a society in 1200 BCE because at that point they would have been swamped by the sea peoples.
Rabbinic society?
Rabbinic Judaism comes out of the 4th and 5th century when the Babylonian Talmud is collected and collated.
So you don't think that the Old Testament at all
is not rabbinic? No.
Okay.
And it's patriarchal. So even if it was rabbinic, it wouldn't
fine.
refute. Then there's no examples of what you're talking about.
Well, the issue for me is that what you're doing is you're creating a false dichotomy. You're
Sure, but in terms of debate, that's like 101, knowing what an internal critique is.
I understand what like consistency checks are. I just didn't use the language internal critique, right? So if we want to go back an hour,
Why don't you ask him what hypothesis generation is, Kyla? You're flaming out here. Come on. You've got to be his expert. You just are.
agreed to this idea of chatter, right? How we want to define concepts, agree to them so that we can talk about
Women
ideas.
prattle or chatter? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, 900 BC is probably a better date for that. But like, King David is like, when I'm thinking of it, I'm thinking of a pretty hard distinction between the kingdoms of Israel and the kingdoms of Judah. And so yeah, King David is a pretty good date for 900 BCE, if that is the case. I tend to have a difficulty with the dual monarchy thing. I like archaeological evidence.
Kidding. Go ahead.
So if you agree to that, and then you agree to the terms, you can change them later. I'm just going to be good faith. You can change them later if you want to. Let's just go back to the terms again and narrow it down to what we
Please, God, no.
can agree to of what feminism and patriarchy means. Because now, like, all you're doing
I
is...
gave a very precise definition for patriarchy, right?
Sure, I did
And you
too.
gave a very loose definition as to what you think feminism is, which could encompass conceivably anything that helps women. And that's an ambiguity fallacy.
Then provide a different definition. Don't agree to it.
In my opening statement, I said that I believe feminism is a revolutionary philosophy that destroys society.
NotSoErudite has committed many sins, but I would point out that Martin Heidegger was already dead.
It was brought about to change society in toto and ultimately to serve into oligarchy.
Yes, so like when we're talking about a significant portion of biblical history is not necessarily substantiated by archaeological evidence. So yeah, I get a little bit on that because like there is a very strong inclination to treat the Bible as history, and that's not good. For example, Exodus and the entire story of the Israelites being enslaved by or rather the Hebrews being enslaved by the Egyptians has absolutely zero archaeological evidence, but it forms a very sufficient portion of the modern day Israeli view of themselves in mythology. And like all of that is like tricky and gets into the distinction between history as history, a academic study, and history as history, a mythological subset of nationalism. Let's to argue in the same way as Yu-Gi-Oh duels that are presented in children's media. You activated by logical fallacy trap card, and all of us have to go to the Shadow Realm in response.
Archival designs and people.
I watched like one episode of Yu-Gi-Oh in my life. It was the first one, and apparently this dude gets his cards tossed over the ocean and then continues to play card games, which is confusing to me to begin with, and probably why I don't watch much anime.
And I gave sources. You can read the Rockefeller's authorized biography. They have a whole discussion of Abby Rockefeller funding third wave feminism in Cell 16.
Sorry, how is this not just as ambiguous as the one? It's just a revolutionary
Just as ambiguous.
system?
I'm literally giving you the people who funded it and the actual names of the people, like Cell 16.
I don't know why you're appealing to. I don't know why you're appealing to authority right now. None of this matters.
No,
I'm
that's
asking
not
for
an
a
authority.
definition.
Okay, that's not appealing to authority. Appealing to authority is when I say Bob is wrong in his assertion that the Earth is round because Dr. Mahmoud Abbas said so. Why do I care what Dr. Mahmoud Abbas says? Also, the Earth is round. An appeal to authority is using the authority to buttress your argument in place of a logical, coherent response. Not, I've named an authority. And this goes on for several minutes. So let's go talk about the waves of feminism.
If we go back to Wollstonecraft, if we go back to the suffrage movement, if we go back to the notion of women not being married at certain ages as children, so the first wave wanted not just suffragism.
Loath I am to hand anything to Rachel Wilson, the harpy. She's right.
But they also wanted to not have child brides and that kind of stuff.
I'm really proud of you. You got
But they
two
also
things.
listen.
One more.
I'm not. Shut up.
We're super close.
Shut up and let me finish.
We're
I'm
super
not
close.
done.
Yeah, I believe
I'm not
you.
done. They also wanted better work hours. They wanted women to have inheritance rights. They wanted women to be able to.
Was this archaeological expert on the History Channel? Because then you better check.
Okay, so
Get jobs and they wanted women in the workforce and to be in positions that they didn't have. So they wanted certain social rights that
so
women did, like voting, right? Suffrage, right? Those are all first wave.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
This is your definition of feminism? Okay, I'm writing it down.
Are you serious?
I'm so dumb.
You
I'm
asked
even writing
for the
it down
history
for
of it.
I didn't ask you for the history.
Holy shit, he is so mad that a woman is talking back to him. It's kind of hilarious. I'll admit, I get annoyed in these types of discussions when people talk over each other. It's why I don't do that many debates. It's why I like doing shows like Maya Atkinson's Bad Science Sunday, because it's a respectful and like fun environment where people can talk and have a good time. That's a good panel show. This is fucking nuts and not something I think I would want to do.
history. I asked you for a
You
definition.
said that it's historical,
Okay,
and I'm
rights
giving
of
you the
women,
movements.
I'm not asking for the history. I'm asking
You
to
said it is historical, so I have to go back to the people.
No,
You're so dumb that you can't conceive of a position apart from the people who came up with the position.
I'll do so. Israel. I can define Israel without
What does this
going
have to
through
do-
the entire history of Israel. Feminism, while it
No,
does
you can't.
have,
Actually,
yes,
you
of
can't.
course you can.
No,
because
this is
for the
so
sake
silly
of conversation,
because
we
you
have to
admitted it's
agree
a
what
historical
construct is.
movement. Therefore, it can't be divorced from the people in history.
I'm not asking
Do you
to
think it
divorce
came out of the sky?
You're
Did it come
again,
into
this is a
people's
false
minds out of the
dichotomy.
sky
This
or
is a
from the
false
people?
dichotomy. You're doing a false dichotomy again.
What are you, dude? You don't
You're
even.
you're
this is
acting
so
like
crazy.
you're acting
Ooh, more trap cards.
like you can't define it without the history. I'm telling you.
Correct. It's a historical movement by your own definition.
That doesn't mean that you can't make a definition for the word,
Yes,
so
you
we
have
can
to
just
go
talk
to the
about
people.
it.
Where do you think words come from? From people.
That
They
doesn't
don't
mean-
drop out of the sky. They
I'm really surprised he didn't say God.
come from people.
Jay, I know you can do this. You can define a word without giving me a 5-minute
you
monologue
can't.
on the history.
No, you can't.
So there's no way for you to define feminism.
Would you go to a
without
dictionary?
history.
That's an appeal to authority.
No, it's
an
not.
appeal
Yes,
to
it
authority.
is.
Oh. No, it's not. It's not. It's not. Is he allowed to tag out? He should be. I want to hear her define Israel without reference to anything historically contingent. I do too, but we're not going to get there.
Okay, there are appeal to authorities that are fallacious, and there are appeal to authorities that are
Oh,
non-fallacious.
like when I give the examples of the
Rockefeller
funders,
as
the
a
funders of
funder
it.
is not an appeal.
It's not just a
legitimate-
funder. Abby
Vodka, I swear to God, if there was anyone ever tries to do that, they're dead to me.
was involved in Cell 16. She's not just a funder.
That doesn't matter. That
It
doesn't
does
mean,
because it came from them.
that doesn't mean that she's a relevant authority to cite.
The one who funded it
That's not citing an authority. Oh, God.
and got it going at Chicago University is
Funded
not relevant.
portions of the third wave, yes.
Correct.
That doesn't mean that
No,
she
it
gets
comes
to
out of her money.
No, that doesn't mean
Millions
that-
of
Oh, we're debating feminism. Let's go to
listed
15
out,
minutes.
and that's the definition of the word.
False.
That's
false.
Really?
Yeah, I've never said
Because
that.
I'm giving you the entire
Jay.
context of the history of feminism,
Why?
and you're saying, I need a fucking definition.
Yes.
As we're working through the actual history of it and the definition of
because
what
again,
it is.
to give me
You admitted that it's a
Okay, like this is still happening, and we're 50 minutes in, and like at some point you have to be willing to assert what you believe, Kyla. You like she's sitting here trying to be like bouncing like a butterfly, and I doing the boxing thing. Can't hit me, and like it's not working for you because all you've managed to do is make this guy make this here face like. He's so enraged that a woman isn't kowtowing to him. Like, that's all you've managed to do, but that's not really productive. He doesn't know definitions of history. No, I don't think, like, Have you ever watched the Alex Jones TV show? They're not a concise group at all.
the historical movement.
that has nothing to do with you giving me a definition so that we can talk about it.
That it's a historical
Of course, Jay.
movement,
Yeah.
so the history has to do with it, you idiot.
I don't need the history for you to give me a definition, you
We
idiot.
have to go to the people who are the philosophers of it.
You can just define
Like
it.
Mary Wollstonecraft and her positions.
You can just define
like
it.
egalitarianism.
You can just define it. So
I'm
we can
defining
fucking
it
move
for
on.
you. I've been defining it, and you just keep yapping and melting down over your notes.
Well, the issue is that it has taken me pushing you to be specific over and over for 45 minutes. We have 5 points now.
Because you don't
for
have
feminism.
anything other than this.
That's false.
How
I
does
gave
any
you
of
multiple
this
definitions.
prove your position that feminism is good for society? As
Honestly,
a feminist,
can we
you're
get there?
showing us that you're not good for society. So you're actually proving my point as you yap and argue. You're
That's actually
No, if I was going to argue who's good for society, I'd toss you both overboard. You're in Florida. It's basically a ship.
a great example of an
yes,
at-home.
That is actually
That is an at-home,
That is an
actually.
act, but it's
All right. There is a minor crisis occurring right now. I'm running out of booze. So we're going to take a short break, and then I'll be right back. right, good news. I got some dried cranberries and some booze, and we shall continue.
But it's an illustrative ad hominem. Yes, correct.
That's true. It was a very creative ad hom. Okay, so we have 5 points that you would like to define feminism. Is there any other points that you want to define feminism with?
Yes,
Is there
the
anything
people
else?
who funded that also said
Yeah.
that they like the movement because it destroys the nuclear family, gets women in the workforce, taxes the other half of the population, and reduces the population because there's less families.
Okay, let's talk about the nuclear family, because the nuclear family is a thoroughly unnatural thing in the course of human development. And this guy's entire bid is about natural. So nuclear family is typically a pair of generations living together, their own home, separate from other generations in their own family. This is not really how, like, most people live for much of history and in much of the world still. The ability to have an abundance of housing as such to be able to create a nuclear family is in and of itself a sign of economic, success is one way to put it. But like, it's not a natural formation. Like, typically child rearing has been a communal activity throughout much of human history. It's been something, the phrase, "it takes a village," primarily refers to raising children. And it would be a collective effort on the behalf of the parents in the village and the grandparents and everyone working together to help each other to raise kids. Nuclear families have led more to the fragmentation of our society than I think we really realize, to a fairly significant degree, I think, too. For example, if you're of a certain age, you'll remember being like significantly closer to your neighbors, I think, in the 90s than you are today. Like a lot closer, to be honest. And like, that's not really a thing. Like, you might be friendly with them, but by and large, we have fragmented into small household structures. The nuclear family doesn't exist in most of society. And it's not really useful as a child rearing formation. It's incredibly useful to increase economic consumption, though, because now instead of having like a household with like 3 or 4 generations, you have 2 generations in a household. So now you're buying more houses, more consumables for those houses. And all of these things, like, don't really contribute in a real sense to community. They contribute to a sense of consumerism. So like, the nuclear family is not a natural or a biological formation at all. In fact, if you want to argue about what is or is not natural, like a nuclear family contributes more to alienation than it does to success of societies. Yeah, you have to buy more of everything. So the nuclear family is not like the preservation of the nuclear family is probably going to be a long-term impossibility for society. Yeah, exactly, Palm Dad. Do you do that today? No, not really. Like, I'll wave to my neighbors when I'm out walking my dog, but it's a act of friendliness to make them not throw things at me or sick the homeowners association on me, more than it is any kind of genuine connection.
How do you want to summarize that?
Why do I have
destruction
to?
of
You
nuclear
can't remember
family?
what I just
So
said.
feminism
You can't
is-
remember 4 sentences I just said.
No, I can remember. I just want to like, you're you're just very yappy. And so I'd like to
I'm
make it
yappy.
succinct. Yes,
I'm yappy.
to give me a definition, you've had to give me an entire century's worth of history, even though
Like when you admitted that it's a historical movement, so it can't be
here's the
it
thing,
can't
Jay,
be divorced from the
you
historical
know what you
people.
could have done? You could
Okay, let's I've talked to my neighbors once. Yeah, fair. Let's we are quite into this now. Here, if I get another $15 of donations, we'll skip to the next segment and end the pain. Link at the top of the page, at the top of chat. You can end this. You can put everyone out of their misery. You can be a hero today with your dirty fiat money.
could have just said to me, so that we can move forward with this conversation, feminism is
Yeah, but I'm not going to grant
rights
you.
of women, men
it's
and
a
women
debate,
are equal, labor
so I'm
rights,
not going to
civil
grant
rights,
you
and trans rights.
simple answers in a debate.
Why wouldn't you just
you.
define a word?
I
Well,
don't
if we
owe
can,
you
if
a
we can,
definition.
maybe we could avoid some of the insults, and if we can, also allow people to finish their thought.
The insults are the best part.
Let's try to
Okay, are you
not
happy?
do interruptions, but go ahead.
Yeah,
So
are
I
you?
want to know how any of this helps your case to prove feminism is good for society.
Well, we can get there now that we've defined feminism.
Okay.
So destruction of nuclear family is another one that you would like to add to
Sure.
the definition of feminism.
That's why the people who fund it matter, is because they say that.
Okay, I would
Okay, can we donate to stay on the debate? $50 and you can stay on the debate.
argue that the destruction of nuclear families is not inherent to most feminist.
My neighbors called the cops on me because I left my front door open once. Well, yeah, leaving your front door open, you crazy person. You don't know who lives next to you. Why would you do that?
movements and is bad. So I reject that part of your definition.
So the people who want that in society and say that it does that don't matter. Because you have
They're not the feminism that I'm fighting for.
because you have a definition that is so elastic to make it anything that you think helps women. And that's why I've said you've already lost the debate,
I was
because
pretty
you're elastic.
The
It's not specific.
empowerment. You define.
That's why I asked you
empowerment
that
of
open
women and
statement.
promotion of femininity. So empowerment means things
That
like
is
removing obstacles.
ambiguous.
And promotion of
It's
femininity would be
ambiguous.
like making feminine traits viewed as respect-worthy.
Like submitting to authority in men? Is that a feminine trait?
No, I would not say so.
So it's not clear. It's ambiguous.
I would say
so it's,
submission is.
you have to
feminine.
define it.
I would say submission.
Clear.
Hang on a
It's
second.
ambiguous.
I would say
So it's,
submission is.
you have to
feminine.
define it.
Submission is feminine. I have news for you, Kyla. It's going to be very latex covered news, but you'd be very surprised at who are submissives in our society. You'd be very surprised indeed. Particularly because I'm pretty sure you're married to one.
I would say submission's feminine, but I don't think it's to men specifically. No.
Oh, okay.
It would be like to any authority, right?
To any authority.
Yeah.
Are most authority men?
A lot of them are, but some are
So it
women.
would be to men.
Nope, it would be to authority. But men aren't a
It's two idiots fighting.
class. Men aren't a class.
But most authorities are men, and they are submitting.
No, like, okay, and this is really like weird. Again, this is where an understanding of intersectionality comes in, right? You are not just a man or a woman. You are black, white, Asian, African, European. You are gay, straight, bi, trans. You are all kinds of things. And like this creates a system of unique interactions in your life. You are not necessarily simply defined by your gender. You are not necessarily simply defined by those things. And this is where like an understanding of intersectionality helps, because some men are forced into naturally submissive roles in life. Most men actually are in submissive roles in life, whether at jobs, they report to bosses, they do things at the behest of others. And throughout much of their professional life, they are submitting to people. Class affects your circumstances. This is where this fails as a functional debate, because neither one of them understand feminism to begin with. And they are not allowing for the interactions in society that exist everywhere to define and understand how these things came to be. So is he talking about the history of feminism? No, not remotely, because feminism is informed by so very many things that people are, and so very many intersections. And to understand this properly is to understand that these create areas of shadow that affect your life and how you move forward, areas of oppression and privilege, and then not necessarily like coherently explained by any one thing. So no, this is silly, and you can get out of this for $15.
To that, right? So it would be.
Yeah, but the idea. Okay, you love semantic fights.
No, it's called a debate.
I can do that too. If you want me to just like mock you every time you stutter, we can have a super fun
It's
conversation.
just how debates work. I'm sorry.
Mocking people when they stutter is not.
Rhetoric is part of debate. Yes,
This is not rhetoric. This is just you being.
Have you ever watched an
performative.
Oxford Union debate? They make fun of each other.
I'm fine with you making fun of each other.
That's what I've been doing.
Do something, Caleb. Make fun of him. Please. Show us some of that wit you claim you have.
Would you like to have a productive conversation too, or do you want to just? Do you want? We can circle the drain.
I'm having a great time.
That's fine. We can just continue to circle the drain.
And how does this prove feminism is good for society?
Okay, so I already said I would reject the destruction of the nuclear family. I don't think it's central to most feminism. I think most,
Was it central to Cell 16?
It sounds like it was, but I would say most fourth wave feminists, for example, are not very pro destruction of the nuclear family. In fact, there's like an entire like barefoot pregnant movement within the fourth wave that is very much.
The point of the moderator is to occasionally adjust Kyla's microphone, apparently.
About embracing being pregnant, being motherhood, and like promoting that as a good thing.
Is that the attitude that most feminists in society have?
I would say a lot of young feminists are directly.
But are they the most?
I wouldn't.
No, they're not.
Most
right.
Also.
Okay, let's. Is that the direction most feminists have? It depends. If you go into the back log of videos on Two Guys Talking History, you will find a bad thumbnail and a fairly early discussion with some messed up audio that I have called One Guy Talks to Emily Likens, Trauma-Informed Doula. And you should go watch that if you haven't, because it's good. Emily Likens, if you, and I imagine you would be, are unaware, is a very good friend of mine. We went to high school together. We didn't always get along, and sometimes we got along very well. But she's a very good friend of mine, and she has dedicated the better part of her life to reproductive health. She has 2 children that she adores and works very hard to raise, and she is a wonderful mother. She's also one of the most raging leftist feminists you will ever find in your life. Feminism is very difficult to nail down to things like this. No, Ryan Macbeth, I shall not watch your video. You make me mad. Feminism is a very difficult thing to nail down like this. And again, I encourage you to go watch. In fact, fuck it. I'm going to go get it and put it in the chat. Because she has spent the better part of her life first as an abortion rights advocate, and now as a doula, and she advocates very strongly for women's experiences through birth and how it works for them. She does wonderful work. Let's find that interview, because I am, at least in part, a somewhat intelligent man who knows what I'm doing. Don't mind me and my dead air. Just pretend like I'm saying something productive. Here we go.
Also don't want to destroy the nuclear family.
Well, in academia and in society
feminists
in general,
want to get married and have kids.
Does this worldview promote, in general, in society, in academia, and in the corporate world, the destruction of the family, or does it help it?
It tends to promote it. Yeah, they want women to be mothers who can also
Feminism
work.
Promotes women in society in general.
I would say fourth wave feminism is very pro-mother.
No,
yeah.
I asked you about the majority of feminism today.
Yeah, but waves are historical periods, and as such, if a concurrent wave is pro a thing, then it is pro a thing, and the period after it, which is no longer extant and active, is not extant and active.
Feminists are fourth wave.
That's institutionalized.
Yeah, most institutional academics are fourth wave.
And they want people to have kids.
Yes.
They're not anti-natalists.
No, some of them are, but most of them are not.
In institutions?
Yes.
No, that's crazy.
I don't know what to tell you. I've been reading lots of fourth wave feminists.
I've been in academia. I've been in institutions.
Me too.
I've never met a feminist in academia or in institutions who thinks that there should be more people and more kids. They all believe in depopulation, the ones that I've met.
Which ones have you met? Let's have some examples. Let's go. Come on, Jay. Some examples.
That's crazy. I've just met lots of feminists that don't believe that. And regardless, those feminists who are like basically death cult.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say neither one of you have met that many feminists.
Feminists, I'm not interested in advocating for their worldview.
That's fine.
I don't have to own them.
But the history of feminism,
just like you don't have to own like Protestants or something.
Most feminism, right? So you've got a nuanced feminism, I guess, is your take, right?
I just have like a pretty traditional like fourth wave feminism.
Okay, so but it's not historic feminism, right? Or is it first wave?
It's fourth wave,
So it's tied to history?
of course, because there's
Oh,
waves.
so it is tied to history.
Yeah, but the waves.
Oh, but
the
it meant-
essential
Oh, for fuck's sake, shut up, both of you. Is Israel and now? Oh God, that's
Part of feminism,
How
but
is it a false analogy to compare Israel, defining Israel?
Because it's
And
an
defining
ancient
feminism.
nation state.
Why
and
does the-
feminism is a modern political, social, revolutionary movement. They don't
But so is the Byzantine Empire, Jay.
compare.
So why does the extent of the length
And
of
you
history make them
admitted-
disanalogous?
You've already lost the debate because you admitted that the definition can't be divorced from the history, and then you said the opposite. That means you've massively contradicted yourself within the last 5 minutes.
Again, you're just making shit up. I'm glad that the made-up narrative.
everybody
of the story,
heard you,
Okay,
so
I'll
that's
do
fine.
this. Jay just lost the debate because he's strawmanning me and putting words in my mouth that didn't happen. Wow, I'm really good at debating. Do you want to go back to the actual conversation?
Sure.
Okay, so why is it false?
Where's the conversation? Six-wave feminism is transcending your physical existence and becoming pure energy.
Falsely analogous when you're saying that to define words you must
Yeah, that's a good point, Pippa. If fourth-wave feminism is characterized by anything, it's patriarchy hurts men too. While I'm referencing other YouTubers, and I understand that she is considered cringe at some points, but ContraPoints has a good video. I think it's called Men. Or at least she did. She sometimes deletes shit. Had a really good video that kind of talks about this concept of the relationship that men have to feminism. And it's old. Let's see if it still exists. ContraPoints. Apocalypse, pronouns, Tiffany Tumbles, the West, incels, autogynephilia, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, reading off ContraPoints videos out loud is probably unwise. I think it's incels. If it's not incels, then it's incels. And if you want some peak early bread tube, ContraPoints is for you. Yeah, I could tell Daedalus has been taking notes. Look, I watch your show to refine my eventual right-wing grift. That's what's happening. Like one day you're going to see me sitting there in a darkened room in a podcast talking about how the Thetans are taking over the magnets, and Tapioca Weasel will just sit there with red in the face. It's my eventual plan. It's my evil plan.
include the entire history to define the word. Why is it disanalogous to compare feminism to Israel? I asked you to define.
Because Israel is a country and feminism is a social and political movement. I don't know what you want from us.
Define feminism, and I asked you to define Israel,
I have no
and I
idea
asked you if you
what
could define
Israel has
Israel
to do-
without the
this is the
3
craziest
centuries of
debate
history.
ever.
And you said, well, it's different. It's a false
Correct,
analogy.
it's a false analogy.
Why is it a false analogy?
How many centuries of history?
Centuries of
debate
history.
ever.
And you to compare feminism to Israel. I asked you to define feminism, and I asked you to define Israel,
I have no
and I
idea
asked you if you could
what
define
Israel has
Israel
to do-
without the
this is
3
craziest
centuries of
debate
history.
ever.
3 centuries of history of Israel is a real setback for the Zionists.
And you said, well, it's different. It's a false
Correct,
analogy.
it's a false analogy.
Why is it a false analogy?
Because they're two totally different things. And you already admitted that feminism is a historical movement and that it can and can't be divorced from the history.
So is Israel.
That's making my point, you goofus.
No, it's
Yes,
not.
it is.
I'm saying you can obviously define Israel without going through 3 centuries, which you agreed to. That's why you
It's
don't.
a false analogy because
you
it's
won't define Israel with the 3
It's an
centuries because it's
ancient
just
nation.
long. It's just long.
It's an ancient
Whereas
nation state.
modern feminism only has 100 years. So I
mean,
can
this-
give the history of that, but I can't give the history of Israel to define it because it's too long, essentially. That's your argument. That's
No.
what. Yes, that is your argument. It is not falsely analogous. And also
keep yapping,
comparing
it
two
makes
different. Very different
But
breed.
optics and who won the debate is judged by the audience.
Yeah, but the audience isn't just chatters, right? It's also viewers, and these are not the same person.
I bet the comments are going to say otherwise.
It's worth noting that Erudite has been utterly dragged by both the commentary YouTube community, me, Sunday, and everyone on Twitter. And the only one I've seen defending Erudite at all is Wick, and Wick manages to come down on the wrong side of absolutely everything. And so we're an hour and 40 minutes into this, and no one has won the debate, and no one has managed to produce a coherent definition of feminism, and no one has managed to do anything. And I haven't gotten my $15. What if I promise to sing for you? If I promise to sing again, will you start donating money? We're moving on. Oh, we're probably not doing all of this either. So this is our friend, Whatifalthist, who has decided to produce more content fresh from his ayahuasca-induced incoherent ramblings, explaining every Jewish migration expulsion. I'm sure this won't be anti-Semitic at all. Follow me, my friends, into the death of all that we know.
I went to enormous lengths to research the Jewish civilization video I'm about to release after this. I read something like 3,000 pages in a few-month period just to reach the threshold of knowledge in which I felt like I could write it. The way I write these videos is that I keep pushing until I hit an intuitive.
Why does the West end at most of Canada? Also, like, the Amazon is apparently not Latin America anymore. And there's this big void in Africa again. And here in Australia, in Siberia. And strangely enough, in the middle of Central Asia. And Antarctica. Whoever makes these maps is truly one of the most high people that lives in our society.
Threshold in which I can explain the essence of that civilization in a sentence. There's a concept in the philosophy of alchemy in which after you study a certain topic, you gain enough mastery of it in order to control it. This was the origin of the philosophy of science, which has deep alchemical roots. I call this...
What? No. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. Let's carry on.
The master key, or the singular intuitive understanding of that thing's soul. People also call it the skeleton key, and I find for researching these videos, there's always
The master key book for each major civilization. Greco-Roman, The Ancient City by Pascal de Coulon. Indian, The Soul of India by Henri de Rencourt. Chinese, China by John Key, or apparently there's two master keys for China, or Soul of China by Rencourt. The Rise of the West by William McNeill. Islamic Destiny Disrupted by Taman Ansari. Mesoamerican Blood and Fire by Fahrenbach. Orthodox, A History of Russia, Mongolia, and Central Asia by David Christian. That's a setback for the Greek Orthodox. Egyptian, Egypt by Breasted. Apparently, these are the one book you need to read to understand 8 civilizations, which encompass apparently 90% of the planet.
Always some author who is better than every other author in that field combined. I wrote a list for each civilization video here.
I like that he's embracing his new role as an esoteric whack job.
Which book I found to be the skeleton key.
This is actually the first Whatifalthist video I visited since his January surprise of going fucking insane. So like this should be fun.
The thing with Jewish civilization, first of all, is that much like India, I kept finding that this is one of those asterisk civilizations. What that means is that in that I would say the West is marked for the heroic search for the truth, the Greco-Roman civilization by attaining bodily perfection, and China for harmony. For both India and the Jews, probably since both societies were designed by mystic priest classes who naturally deal with paradox and complexity as part of their job, for For everything I say about those civilizations, there's always a subtlety and another side of it, which is the exact opposite. This is why for India, I split it into 2 videos, and as I tried to figure out how to write the Jewish civilization video, I realized that the contextual frame of facts needed to understand what was going on in
It wouldn't be a Whatifalthist video without some Spenglerian nonsense.
Jewish history at all was so enormous that I had to make just another video explaining Jewish history itself. The thing is, there's so many facts, so much background, and so much history to cover that the only way to understand the actual video is to tell you that history. For most civilizations, that society started in a certain
Wait. The only way I can explain history to you is to tell you history. I see we're starting strong with the tautology today.
historic context, with a certain ethnic group and with a certain religion. The thing is that that was initially true for the Jews, but then what happened was that the Jews kept getting batted around the world. The story of the Jews reminds me of a great epic, how certain stories like Lord of the Rings, Ben-Hur, or the life of Napoleon by themselves cover countless lands, characters, and events over long periods of time. In some ways, those stories themselves become symbolic for their era of history, in that they offer a beautiful snapshot of the inner character of certain places and times with the people who faced it. One of the most
This is a tricky thing to say depending on how you choose to focus on Jewish history.
blackpilling things I've learned from talking to both dozens of Ivy League people my age, political pundits on both the right and left, and even a lot of professors, is that no one reads a fucking book today. If I can read 70 or so books a year, you can read
You cannot read 70 or so books a year. You're ill-equipped to read one book and understand it.
10. I will take a moment of silence now to shame you into reading more. The worst part of this is that people don't even have a contextual frame of what happened in a specific moment of history. Thus, they say the stupidest stuff. In the next few
Oh, Whatifalthist viewers.
months, I'm going to make a video talking about if the current revisionist narrative on World War II is accurate, and that's something I stumbled to into that video as well. That
Oh God, this is going to be good. Okay, let's take a bet. We have added a poll. Will Whatifalthist go full Nazi Germany is good when he starts to explain the quote-unquote revisionist history of World War II?
if you read literally any book
There is a right answer to this poll.
on World War II, a lot of this stuff is demonstratively and obviously false. However, no one
A lot of this stuff is demonstrably and obviously false. What stuff?
reads a fucking book anymore. I apologize if this comes across as rude and condescending, but this is one of those topics that feels like I'm yelling at kids with power tools who are trying to tear the house down. When people talk with the
More power.
Jews, they all have some narrative, and they won't let you talk for a sentence before the irrationality seeps out. The way I deal with this is by telling all of you to go to hell, and telling you what I think the truth is. We spend too much time trying to please others today and have good optics, and so I won't. This is just a video going through the context and facts of Jewish history.
Are we gonna hit anti-Semitism soon? I think we are.
Anti-Semitism is flooding the internet today thanks to a whole lot of crap being shared, and few people know what to believe.
By the way, this is another reason why I don't like ground news, because they're willing to pay Whatifalthist. Now back to the video.
Part 1, Genesis. For a lot of the early Jewish history, we have basically no other sources, and thus indirectly the Bible ends up becoming one of our best sources. The Jews emerged in the
No, it does not. If we have no other sources, we have no other sources. Therefore, we cannot rest our argument on the historicity of the Bible.
rubble of the dying and degenerate Bronze Age world. Watch my incredible second podcast,
The degenerate Bronze Age world. Okay, let's assume that the Bronze Age collapse is well understood. It's not. How do we know it's degenerate? We don't even know functionally what's happening. We have ideas, but how can you say it's degenerate in the absence of concrete information? That just means degenerate is a word that you made up to try to explain a collapse instead of really analyzing the situation of the collapse. No one, by the way, is going to describe the Bronze Age collapse as degeneracy. They're going to talk about climate change. They're going to talk about the collapse of centralized bureaucracy. They're going to talk about the limitations of that bureaucracy. They're going to talk about the sea peoples. They're going to talk about a whole bunch of things, but no one who's serious is talking about degeneracy.
History 102 if you're interested in hearing more about the Bronze Age, early Israel, or that time period of
I'm only watching these videos if I get 3 college credits.
history. The thing is that the Bronze Age itself is a poorly recorded society in general, with the only records coming from the wealthiest merchants, kings,
No, it's not a poorly recorded society. We don't know what was recorded because it was millennia ago and records were lost, you twit.
and priests. The Jews were irrelevant desert tribes, so we only even barely have any Egyptian records of them at all. The Egyptians were the only major civilization which
We have no substantive records because at this point they would have just been considered Canaanites.
cared about the Jews, so that means practically nothing's written on the topic. Secondly, that the Jews emerged from the dark.
The Egyptians are the only ones who care about the Jews. No. First of all, the Egyptians don't give much of a flying fuck at this point. Secondly, that doesn't know, like... He's using the Bible as a source, and he's pretending that Exodus is history. Oh, God. He's Brianna Wu, but with a penis.
Dark Age period, which came after the fall of the Bronze Age, which had even worse records. The Bronze Age went through its own equivalent to the fall of Rome called the Bronze Age collapse, in which most of
No, it's radically different.
the civilization in the greater Middle East was destroyed in a matter of 20 years for complex reasons I explain in this text.
Probably closer to 100. Degeneracy and collapse and... No! Fuck off.
And get obsessive over disproving or proving it. Well, I stand by the law of chill vibes, a term
Not a law.
I've invented for you should maintain calm unless forced not to.
You should be very uncalm. Your content is bad.
According to the Bible, the Jews started out in Uruk in Mesopotamia, the oldest civilization in the world. Mesopotamian civilization was already in decline, with the horrible
Call Ripley's. Whatifalthist has found the fucking garden. I'm not. Okay, guys, I know I promised we'd go through this, but I can't. I just can't. I don't have nearly enough booze left. And it's 2 hours, and that's the end of my endurance limit. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Like the stream. Donate. Have a good evening. Walk. Hug your loved ones, because people like Whatifalthist exist. I liked him better on drugs.